to order, and we have public comment this morning from Kay Hall, who's joining us. Welcome, Kay. You can unmute yourself.
Hi, thank you. Paul, is there anything should I just start or?
Just jump right in, Kay.
Okay. Well, thank you for your time. Just as a quick introduction, I've lived in Portland most of my life. My husband and myself have both been avid supporters of the parks, been involved in just about every committee that involved, especially use of Mount Tabor, from dog parks to the reservoirs to most recently the long blocks. So I just want to emphasize that we are committed to kind of the vitality of the parks, and also really respect the work that the people who maintain the parks do. And so the trick is really kind of finding the balance and all of that. And I asked for time to speak because I know that there's already been a process to discuss the use of what we call the long block, which is the portion of Mount Tabor Park that's between Lincoln and Harrison Street and 60th, leading into the park. And there was a process pre-pandemic about converting about a third of that long block into a space to stage plants and trees to then be transferred to parks as needed, and that it would be fenced off and not available for public use. My husband actually was on the group that talked about kind of the best way to mitigate that. So I understand there's already been a process in place and that this is somewhat an 11th hour plea, but I think that especially during the pandemic, the question of what's the highest use for all park space became really apparent. The long block has been heavily used, continually heavily used in a very respectful way by individuals and groups. And it's just been more and more apparent how critical it is to protect every piece of the park, no matter how small, for that highest use. And so that's kind of my immediate concern is if there's possibility to delay or redirect using the long block in that way. The greater concern I have, though, well, there's two. One is that it's not that I'm trying to create a not in my backyard scenario, but I really challenge using any existing park space for the purpose of staging plants, which would result in it not being available to the public. And my observation from years of working through park processes is that the park department tends to make a decision, announce it, and then have a public process where people respond to it. But there really isn't, the public really hasn't been engaged in the problem solving. And I challenge the assumption that in order to deal with acquiring new plants and trees for the parks, that existing park space has to be used regardless of where it is in the city, and that I believe there's other alternatives to doing it. And that it just seems like the flat space at Mount Tabor Park was an easy solution, although it wasn't well received by the people who attended the public sessions that were involved with it. So I know that these are legitimate needs the Park Bureau has, and I'm hoping that you as an advisory group or a board can really help support them in exploring other ways to meet their operational needs. And so that we can protect not only this green space, but other green spaces around the city. And I know it's a really small piece of property. It's probably the equivalent of a city block that we're talking about, but it also feels like death by a thousand cuts. So again, I know it's kind of an 11th hour and 59-minute appeal, but I know that you all did some really good work in terms of protecting the parks and not allowing the parks to become camping sites, and a way to resolve our homeless problems in the city. And I'm hoping that you might be able to provide the same kind of consideration for this.
Thank you, Kay. We appreciate your comments. They're very genuine, and I don't know if anyone from Park Assets wants to address that briefly, but we will talk about it probably in our Land Use and Infrastructure Committee and take it from there.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much for your time.
Paul, it looks like Lauren has her hand up.
Oh, thank you, Lauren.
Yeah, thanks, Bonnie and Paul and Kay. Thank you for expressing your interest in that long block. I do want to clarify, and I'm sure you may or may not be aware that the long block we're talking about, the community garden is going to remain, but that property was always part of actually the maintenance yard. It's always been, and if you look at the master plan historically for 100 years, it feels like it's part of the community. Absolutely, I understand what you're saying, but it's historically been used for plant nursery uses. And so it's not a matter of taking property away from the community. It's actually, we donated some of the property to the community temporarily while we were figuring out how to work through the master plan process. And we have been working on this project, as you know, and because your husband was involved in it since 2017.
Mm-hmm.
I've had many public meetings about it. And so at this point in time, we have a bid to do the construction on this bond project to repair the maintenance yard and to do a new building there. Our bid is by J.W. Fowler, and our construction is set to start in this summer. So I just wanted to add that perspective. It's been through land use, it's been through historic review, and we have tried to work with the community on, for example, we're having a decorative iron fence on the part that we're we're taking back over for plant storage in the long block. And we also have decorative fence along the pathway that's going along the side of the maintenance yard and landscaping up to Mount Tabor. So I hope that helps. I'm sorry. I think at this point, we probably won't take a step back on this one, but we can talk more about it, Paul, if you want, at the Land Use Working Committee. We do have a good neighbor agreement signed by PP&R and the Mount Tabor and South Tabor Neighborhood Associations, the Friends of Mount Tabor Park, and Friends of the Community Gardens. So I guess that's really what I wanted to say about.
Yeah, I'm aware of all of that. I've been involved in most of that. So I just feel like the wrong question. The problem was defined in a way that didn't create alternatives for that solution. I also understand the historical use of it by the maintenance yard. I was here when it was initially an unfenced nursery. So I've seen the evolution. So I'm aware of all that. I just think based on where we're at as a community right now, it just is, regardless of that, it just kind of bears revisit. And I think we've learned a lot in this last year about the importance of the park and all the spaces in the park. But I appreciate your background information, Lauren. Thank you.
Thank you, Kay.
So,
we need to move
I'll
on.
let you go. Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, everyone. Hopefully everyone's had an opportunity to review the minutes from our April meeting. And do I have a motion to approve those minutes? Or are there any questions on those minutes?
I'll motion to approve.
Thank
Second.
you. Thank you, Mike. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Thank you. Our minutes are approved for April. So here it is, early May. It feels more like early June, but I thought for an icebreaker this morning, we'd talk about our favorite seasonal flower. And for me, it's the camas. Usually this time of year, the camas fields are peaking right now. I just love that lavender splash that you can see in different places and sometimes in forested wetlands as well. So it doesn't have to be a native plant. It could just be trees, flowers that you particularly enjoy this time of year. And let's next go to Adina.
Really any small to medium-sized flowering tree. In particular, I love red bud. That's one of my favorites.
Okay, how about Bonnie?
Well, I was lucky enough to go on a nice long hike in Forest Park a few weeks ago and the trillium were out. So for me, that's the sure sign spring is here. Thank you.
Kenya.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of the Dawn Redwood. I'm always sad when it loses its needles, but super happy, watching that progress when the needles start to come back. And I'm looking at one now and it's almost full. So happy times.
All right. Thank you, Kenya. Brooke.
Well, I always love the Daphne that comes out, but I think it might all be gone now. And hydrangeas, I know they're not really blooming yet, but they're my favorite. And is it the dogwood trees that have like those big, lots of flowers on them? I love those too.
Yes, great. Thank you. Erin.
Yeah, so I actually don't think you can see it, but no, you can't see it from there. Our entire front yard has a hedge of bright pink azaleas, like this color pink. And I don't know, we probably have like 30 of these little azaleas and they don't bloom for very long, but it's like this really bright pink wall around our house for just, a few weeks or something. And it's very fun for my two girls, having this like bright pink flowers. So I think that's probably my favorite. And they kind of opened up on Mother's Day, which was such a joy.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. Mike.
So for me, it's probably a false Solomon seal, which is not the showiest plant on earth, but they just really take off in the spring and fill in all the empty spaces.
Thank you. Casey.
We're hitting that stretch where every month there's a new boom in some type of flower.
Mhm.
But I'm sticking with trillium because it is kind of the announcement of spring.
Yeah, great. Patty.
I'm going to step back to earlier in the year and give praise to Beginia, which is a fairly humble little flower. It was Gertrude Jekyll's favorite, apparently, in the garden. And it starts blooming in November, December, keeps going all through the winter, and it's very welcome. My second would be the Pacific Dogwood, because it really announces spring is here.
Thanks, Patty. Randy.
I will second all votes for Dogwood, but it's a little old-fashioned, but I actually really enjoy the roadies blooming. And I always think back to the landscape architect, Peter Walker, who's designed a number of landscapes in Portland. And he always described Portland Springs as obscene.
Yeah, no kidding. It's a riot of color in the early spring. David.
Hey, good morning, everybody. I'd say I'm originally from Ohio, so springtime for me, we happened to be drawn to a house down in southeast Portland that had a horse chestnut tree in the backyard that we used to call a buckeye tree in Ohio. And every spring that just blooms into these football size clusters of magenta, tiny little flowers. And it reminds me that I love being here, but it also reminds me of my background in Ohio a little bit. So the horse chestnut tree.
Okay, thank you. Tim.
Thanks, Paul. You always have such awesome icebreakers. We got a redbud tree in our backyard about 3 years ago. And it's a really fun one to watch in early spring and through the year. So that's getting my vote.
All right, Alejandro.
Good morning, everyone. I'll agree with Bonnie. For me, the trilliums are just such a clear indication of the season, and in my professional life, the start of a heavy and intense part of the year in Forest Park.
Thank you. Lauren.
There's so many great choices, but I think similar to what was said, being from Michigan, when I came out and went to Dog Mountain for the first time and saw the balsam root, the arrow balsam root, yellow, Oregon sunshine, flowers everywhere. That was pretty impressive.
Yeah, that's pretty impressive this time of year on Dog Mountain. Todd.
My wife and I work at home these days, like lots of us, and we go for walks every afternoon, and we have lots of lilacs on our walk. And if you smell one of those, it's good for your soul.
Yeah, no kidding. Thank you, Todd. Laura.
Good morning. For those of you I haven't met, I'm Laura Lehman, and I'm the new Natural Resources Planner in Lauren McGuire's group. And I like the lupins this time of year, especially when they team up with the balsam root.
Thank you. Maximo. Oh, well, there we go.
Yeah, for mine, I think it's a white lilac. I think it's coming through early. I'm somebody who's not an avid gardener, and so don't know them well. I inherited it in my yard, but that seems to be a consensus from those that come over. I think it's been identified as a white lilac that has come through very early.
Thanks, Maximo. Tanya.
I'm definitely on Team Trillium.
Okay, great. It seems to be the consensus, emerging consensus so far. Thank you. Vicente. You're muted, Vicente.
Dang it. Good morning, Paul and everyone. All the good ones were taken, but indoor, I would say Peace Lily. It's been house plant I bought last year. And then a lupine is the outdoor one. So those are my favorite two.
All right, thank you. And Nicola.
Hi, everybody. I love all the flowers and blooming things, and my allergies show that. But I have this amazing wisteria in my backyard that is so amazing at this exact moment in time. And then I spend the rest of the year trying to keep it away from strangling the rest of my trees.
Thank you. And I'm going to note that we have Corbin, one of our prospective board members on our slate of candidates today, who's joined us as well. So good morning, Corbin.
Good morning.
Okay. Let's move to Adina's director's report.
Great, thank you. I will remind everyone that you have an incredibly long Bureau Director's monthly report in your inbox. I believe it's about 11 pages, but I'm just going to hit on a couple of citywide initiatives this morning. Myself, Jen Cairo, and Casey Jogerst have been participating in a permitting task force that was convened by Commissioner Ryan and the Bureau of Development Services. We've had 3 months over I'm sorry, 3 meetings over the course of about a little bit over a month with a lot of homework in between. It yielded a list of approximately 10 or so mutually agreed upon areas of possible process improvement, with one front runner, which we're going to be attacking together first, and that is to develop a work plan that will include a number of projects to achieve the goal of improving the quality of submittals we receive from applicants. So we have a due date for a work plan of June 18th. And it hasn't been decided yet, but it'll likely be Casey who represents Parks on that 10-person smaller working group to work towards that work plan. The idea is that we will chunk out each of those goals that were agreed upon and sort of just move through them and hopefully slowly but surely improve the permitting process for folks. I've also, along with other bureau directors, we convened a citywide work group that's led by the Office of Equity and Human Rights and the Bureau of Human Resources to develop an action plan, including best practices for bureaus to adopt that focus on recruitment and hiring strategies, retention of Black, Indigenous, and people of color within the workforce, centering promotional opportunities and workplace culture, and building in racial equity into performance evaluations, which we here at Portland Parks and Recreation already do, but apparently not everyone does in the city, but also to include those in bureau director evaluations. I've been here 2.25 years. I've had, 4 or 5 different bosses, and I've yet to be evaluated. So I definitely see the importance of that. Quickly, sustainable future update. The application for the Parks Levy Oversight Committee closed on April 22nd. And the Sustainable Future and Community Relations team conducted outreach around the open recruitment. This month, the selection team will be reviewing applications and making final selections for the 5-member committee. So we're really excited about that. I also wanted to note that the Sustainable Future team is working really closely with our Parks Summer 2021 marketing and communication efforts to ensure that information about the Parks Levy is integrated. So there will be a Parks Levy FAQ and messaging that will be made available to Parks staff, and also summer programming and new positions will be noted as made possible by the voter-supported Parks Levy. So that's exciting. You all may have seen both the press release and maybe electronic mail notification that Commissioner Rubio has directed the Bureau to allocate SDC funds towards quite a few capital projects across the system. These include the North Portland Pool and Aquatic Center. That's $11.7 million, but it's for design only. So we still need to raise probably another $20 to $25 million to actually build out the site. Also the Farragut Park Playground expansion, that's $1.75 million. Mill Park, we actually had a kickoff event a couple of weeks ago. Aaron, thank you for joining us there. Aaron serving on the Mill Park Advisory Committee. That's $10.4 million. The park's about 6 acres. It's right adjacent to an elementary school. It's going to be awesome. So watch that as it unfolds. We've also allocated $1 million towards Kelly Point Park improvements. That's generally just around the visitor experience. So picnic tables, picnic shelter, water access, barbecue pit, and an ADA accessible path. We're also allocating $1.5 million towards a new skate park at Berrydale Park, $1.2 million towards a new splash pad at Wellington Park, and just over $400,000 to multiple nature patches. So we're really excited about that. It's a really popular program, and they're relatively easy to do, and they just have great return on investment. So I'm going to stop there, mostly because we have a really robust agenda, but I wanted to pause to see if anyone had any questions for me or for the staff around our work.
I don't have a question, but a comment. I'm happy to see the $400,000 for additional nature patches. I think they're great in terms of helping educate people about native plants and providing opportunities for pollinators. So I just think it's wonderful.
And I'll add the other thing about Nature Patches, which is especially nice, is that it's also provides a networking and volunteer opportunity for our staff. We bring in staff from different work units on volunteer days to help with the planting. So it serves many, many purposes.
Adina, I don't want to take up a lot of time either, but I did want to at some point, maybe next month, we can get a little bit more of an update on how things are going with respect to workforce recruitment, workforce development. You know, one of the things that came up in the financial sustainability work group was that in other industries, we're seeing a mismatch between, you know, there are definitely a lot of people who need jobs, but a mismatch between the skill sets and experience of those who need jobs and the jobs for which there are openings. And I'm concerned about that, particularly given the situation, you know, we had last year off of seasonal hiring. So I imagine the ramp up there is you know, it's a pretty heavy lift on the part of Margaret and her team. But also with respect to that, with the American Rescue Plan funding, I personally see kind of an opportunity whereby some of that spending, which is so critical both to get our economy back on track, but also an opportunity to really emphasize the need for infrastructure like parks and recreation programs, whereby, you know, some upstream spending investments, both in public amenities, but also in public health, can have some, you know, significant downstream benefits in terms of chronic disease prevention, obesity prevention, things like that, and cost savings as well for us as a society. So, you know, I don't know if you want to respond to those quickly, but I don't want to take up a lot of time, but I think we should be thinking about these things.
Sure. Well, we're always thinking about workforce development. We can definitely do a formal update. I will say that you're right. The levy has, you know, provided us with a wonderful challenge. And I will say that Margaret and her team have been pretty exceptional with regards to promoting our employment opportunities. And you're absolutely right. There is sort of a disconnect. I think what a lot of what's happening also in my mind, and then what I'm seeing is that even folks who are unemployed and looking for work are still very pensive about going into the workforce with COVID, still sort of nipping at our heels. But yeah, we can have her do a full update next time. And in terms of the ARP funding, I actually serve on the city's coordinating committee for that work. And we actually put forward a pre-proposal for all bureaus and the community to respond to. Parks will be submitting our proposals either today or tomorrow. I think the deadline's tomorrow. So we're definitely on top of that. And I'm happy to share those proposals after the meeting via email. And I believe that they speak to all of the concerns that you've raised. Thank you, Bonnie.
Any other questions for Adina? All right, well, then we'll move to our next topic, which is picking up sort of the theme here of concerns. We had 3 board members resign after our April meeting and shared materials with all of you in terms of the background on that. And we don't want to step over it. You can understand why that is the case. So just wanted to provide time today for all of us to talk it through and come to an understanding about what do we learn and how do we move forward to create a board culture that, you know, feels broadly inclusive. Those were sort of the points that were made by Tamara and Alejandra in their resignation letters. So just that, I'll make my intro short. and just want to kick it off that way in terms of what came up for people in terms of reviewing the materials and what questions might I answer or others answer in terms of response to the resignations.
Paul, I would offer a comment, if I may, and that is that something which became apparent as we looked into that was that a great deal of the work group discussion, they were all involved in the same work group discussion, really happened away from the board, and there were a number of absences from board meetings, so that there really wasn't that close connection between the topic and the board as a whole. And I think in order to avoid that sort of situation in the future, we need somehow to ensure that when we do have a report being prepared of whatever nature, that it really is reflective of the board, and that those producing it are participating in board discussion. I have the sense that a lot of this happens sort of in a vacuum, which is not good. And I mean, the purpose of the work group certainly is to be able to deal with very detailed stuff without involving all of the board. But I think there needs to be a more frequent and effective touch back with the board as a whole, in order to make sure that we're all in agreement with what's going on.
Yeah, Patty, I think that's a good observation, or an apt observation, that, you know, as shared with the chronology, the history of this goes back, you know, quite a ways, going back to our 2019 retreat and identifying the need to reinvigorate or sort of transform the community development group into the community engagement group. And the group struggled, you know, to kind of really find its focus. And then it did identify restorative justice rather than racial justice as a focus. And, you know, that is obviously a worthy objective, but something that's very challenging for us as an advisory board to take on. And so there was some constructive, what we thought was constructive criticism, and it wasn't taken that way. So that led to them departing, you know. So yes, they had sort of, if you will, gone down a rabbit hole. And we want to learn from that. We don't want to have a group essentially be untethered, and regular check-ins are key to doing that. And that's one thing we need to learn. I'm curious if there's other observations in terms of feelings, you know, response, and then, you know, lessons learned going forward.
I just want to add something based on that, which is that it's my understanding, and this, I want to be forward thinking, you know, but it is my understanding that Tamara did want to spend time at the full board meeting talking about the work of this group, and that wasn't provided. So my question is that something that will be provided in the future as we discuss the work of this group?
Yeah, that is true, that Tamara had requested to do some of this work with the full board. And because the working groups do the bulk of the real work, I pushed back that I wanted to see them make some progress rather than it just be kind of a brainstorming session. So I think that was, as I described, there were various misunderstandings. So in hindsight, it's clear that I misunderstood what her intent was. And I believe that she may have misunderstood what I was communicating in terms of our accountability as the individual working groups to, you know, do the work between meetings and then report back. And so I think there were just a series of miscommunications that kind of built up and led to the frustrations that they expressed in their resignation letters. So yes, we can do that going forward. Getting to your core question, Aaron, I just think we need to, you know, work at communication. it's one of those things where I think I'm being clear sometimes and realize afterwards that perhaps I wasn't, or just different frames of reference taking different meanings from the same words. So I see hands up for Bonnie and for Randy. So then we'll take these questions, and then Alejandro.
Bonnie, go ahead. Yeah.
Oh,
Please go ahead.
Randy?
No, go ahead.
Okay, sorry, I think, my observation is that, yes, it's true that Tamara requested time at the full board meeting to do some of the things like, setting the framework for the committee, which seemed, in all honesty, neither of the other working groups do that at the full board. However, on the other hand, the other two working groups do report monthly to the full board, which seemed something she was resistant to, which was troubling. So, I mean, I think that, there was definitely a mismatch between what she was envisioning and what the existing framework was, which, I don't know that it was, maybe it came down to communication, Paul, as you said. But, I think once we put standing agenda items as the working group reports, I was hoping that would help the situation, but it didn't seem to. It seemed to exacerbate the problems, because then every month they would sort of say, well, we haven't met, or, oh, a subset of us met and we're processing the feedback we got. So, I'm not sure. I mean, I guess I don't blame you, Paul, for not wanting to have a full discussion of what this working group should develop as a framework at the whole board, because I guess I'm thinking that I'm not sure that, everybody who's active on another working group would necessarily want, I mean, obviously, I do think we want to be aware of what's going on with each working group. So I guess I'm kind of just trying to defend, I'm not saying there wasn't miscommunication, but I'm saying I think that it's a bigger challenge than Tamara wanted space at the full board and didn't receive it. I don't think that, you accepted some fault there, which I appreciate. We can all learn. I'm not sure that was the problem, though. So I don't think you should blame yourself for that. Anyway.
I think it was a symptom rather than a core problem, but yes, appreciate the support that way.
Yeah.
Randy, I think next had his hand up.
Sure. It seemed to me that there was maybe a almost existential question about the board, not to get too highfalutin about it, but it seemed to me there was a misunderstanding, and that the board actually initiates things. Because at least in my 2.5 years, I really never seen the board initiate anything. And that doesn't really seem what it's built for. And I think that seemed to be kind of a fundamental misunderstanding, that somehow that Tamara imagined that the board could initiate a policy change. And so I think that that raises two questions. Is the board being clear enough in its outreach that this is purely an advisory board? It responds to things, it doesn't initiate things. And correct me if I'm wrong, because 2.5 years is not that long, and then there's another question of, is that okay? Is a board built for nothing? For solely for an advisory role? Is that appropriate, and does that design need to be re-examined? So I welcome any correction to potential misperceptions there, but that was my observation, was that they really thought that they were in the driver's seat in a car that didn't exist.
Mm-hmm. Your observations are correct. I mean, they're consistent with mine, that we're an advisory board. We have a role to be advocates for parks. And then we also have a role to help PP&R be accountable to, originally it was implementing the 2020 vision plan. And, now that we're moving on to a new set of planning goals, that's a little bit in question, but yeah, the same basic role is there. We've got these two rails, one is parks advocacy and the other is, making sure that parks is doing what it says it's going to do. And it's a relatively narrow path that we walk between the two of those. I believe that Alejandro had his hand up next, and then Casey.
Thanks, Paul. I would like to echo a little bit of what Randy was just saying, and the idea that of this board as being in a way reactionary versus being a group that would propose something, and just the idea of maybe the problem, or the way that I see it, is that we're trying to fit the type of the work that we're asking this working group to do in the format of a working group that was just not the good match. I mean, I think it's also important to keep in mind that, in particular, when it comes to equity related work, it's not a straight line, and it's messy, and it's usually feels like it's unfinished. And in that sense, maybe the expectations that we set were not realistic, or the goals that were set were not realistic. And in that sense, I think it's also important to highlight or have the conversation about what were the expectations, in particular when working with Portland Parks leadership and staff in this particular type of work, understanding that Parks is committed and already doing this type of work. So I think there's a sense of, or at least from my side, a sense of a little bit of confusion in terms of, are we duplicating work? Are we doing this independently? What's the need for kind of like the two sides to be in actual alignment, and how our work in this sense would inform or affect what Parks is doing? Yeah, that's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Alejandro. I think that those are good observations. Casey.
Thank you, Paul. And thank you for going through this discussion. I've got a correction, 2 comments, and a question.
Okay.
So my correction is on the chronology that was provided. I want to note that I believe that the topic for the March 2021 meeting was actually the proposed community development working group proposal, and not the equity statement. And that will feed into something I need to say later in the agenda, but I just want to make sure that was noted.
Okay.
The two comments I have is one, to Greg. There is, one of the things that the board is charged with is to be a forum for public discussion, and that can kind of feed into what the working group proposal was going for. But I just leave that there. The other comment I wanted to make is, it seems to me in reading Tamara's comments that there is an allegation of systemic problem with not hearing all people on the board. And in other situations, especially in private institutions where that kind of allegation is made, often a consultant or an auditor will be requested. I don't think we've got the bandwidth or the financial bandwidth to do it, but I throw it out there as a practice that's usually adhered to by other entities. And the last question I've got is, we do have in front of us the Portland Parks, the draft of the community development working group proposal. And my question is, what do we do with it now? I'd like to see if it can be moved forward in some way, shape, or form, or if it's going to be discarded. I want a statement that it is being discarded. Thank you.
Thank you, Casey, for the correction, the 2 comments, and the question. So yeah, there's a lot of good material. And the sad irony is there was so much in the proposal that wasn't an issue that we support, and we got hung up on the issue of restorative justice versus racial justice. And just, we had a long conversation about how would we operationalize what they had proposed for racial restorative justice. And I think that's where, again, there was a miscommunication or a misunderstanding in terms of, it wasn't a lack of support for the goals. It's just what's in our lane as an advisory board to be able to provide. And, Kenya could perhaps address this more eloquently than I can, but it was just like, we just couldn't get there in terms of the tools that we have available to us as an advisory board. And I think that was deeply frustrating to Tamara and the group. And, after they had done all this work, to feel like a core element was not being embraced or received the way that they hoped it would. So going forward, I don't want it to just die on the vine. I'd like to pick this up in our retreat next month and see what elements of it in a community engagement group. One of the things that came out in our retreat last year was to engage more proactively with the community. And so that is reaching out to groups that have been underrepresented in the past. So today, we heard from Kay Hall about, Mount Tabor. It's obviously a more privileged neighborhood. People in those areas know how to get on these meetings and make presentations. So we've got to figure out a way to proactively go out to the groups that we're not hearing from regularly because they don't have the same means to connection with us and engage with them, outwardly, directly. And I think that would be much more satisfying in terms of feeling like we are making a difference in terms of racial justice. So that's my response. I'm curious. I see Erin has her hand up.
Well, I'm glad to hear that we're going to be talking more about this at the retreat. So I think maybe that's a good forum for a deeper conversation since we do have a packed agenda. But one thinking I have about the proposal is there's kind of parts of the proposal that are very much geared inwardly towards the board, like racial equity awareness and whatnot for the board, things like that. And then there's kind of the community engagement aspects of the proposal. And I'd almost like to see the board itself take on, not the working group, but the board itself take on that racial equity within the within our little bubble, and also, how to be proactive about creating an inclusive environment. I think we have some really concrete things that we could do that we're aware of, to some of them we brought up here, expectations, what is our role, clarity for members about these things. There's some things that we already know we can do, but my thinking would be, and we can talk about this at the retreat more if other people have ideas, is that we kind of separate that out from the working group, because anyway, that should be the work of the full board, not just a working group to be doing that. Yeah, we've made it an intention for board members to attend the DEI trainings that are available through the city. As far as I'm aware, there haven't been any trainings offered for a little bit, but I would encourage everyone on the board who hasn't taken one of those trainings to do it, because I learned a lot in it, and I think it's very, very helpful. So yeah, I think we can go further than just the city's training, though, in some. Yes, we can. Talking about our own systems and processes that we've developed here on the board, and yeah. Totally. Okay, so we're pretty much at the time that we hope to arrive at for this topic. I don't have a sense, but please correct me if I'm wrong, if anyone has a burning question or comment at this point. If not, we'll pick this up at our retreat, but I just want to appreciate everyone's comments and thoughts on this, and we'll go forward and do our best to become more inclusive. Okay, thank you. All right, so now we have some nominations to talk about, and Erin and Patty are going to take us through that. Great, I'll start, Patty, if that's okay with you. So first, I just want to thank the nominating committee and in this work. We had more applications than I think we've ever had. And it was quite a process, lots of time in a short period, but I think as you'll see, we've got a great slate in front of you today. So I'm going to talk a little bit about we have six new nominations, and then we have also need to reappoint Bonnie and Casey. So just so you're aware. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the 6 people that we're going to be proposing that we nominate, and there will be a vote, right, Paul? That's how it works. So I'll talk about who the nominees are, then we'll do a vote. So first I'm going to talk about Ali Berman. Ali Berman is Communications Manager at Portland Audubon. Ali is also a board member at the Disabled Hikers, an organization that works to build disability community and justice in the outdoors. So that's one. Then we have Dr. Cheryl Corbin, who's also here with us today. Thank you, Dr. Corbin. Dr. Corbin is an assistant professor at PSU School of Urban Studies and Planning, and was also formerly the chair of the Oakland Parks and Recreation Advisory Committee. 3 is Sabrina Wilson. Sabrina Wilson is the executive director at the Rosewood Initiative, and she was formerly a project manager at the City of Portland Office of Community and Civic Life, and then also formerly worked for Portland Parks and Recreation. 4 is Dr. Adrian Feldstein. Dr. Feldstein is a physician at Kaiser Permanente Northwest, and also a swim instructor at Portland Parks and Recreation. She is also a newer member of the Urban Forestry Commission. 5 is Ilana Pertolgini, who's the legislative director at the Office of the Governor. She was previously Labor and Workforce Policy Advisor, and then also used to be on the board of directors of City Club. Finally, we have Nova Newcomer. Nova is the executive director at Friends of Baseball. Prior to that, she was the founder of Blue Hill Solutions, which is a strategic consulting firm. And she is also on Portland State Athletic Advisory Board. So those are our 6 nominees that we're moving forward, a little information about them. Super excited. So I would like to move that we vote to appoint, or well, what is the exact wording I want to use? We vote to, because we're not appointing, right?
We make a recommendation to the commissioner to appoint the 6 nominees.
Okay. So I am going to move that we make a recommendation to the commissioner to appoint these 6 people. Can I get a second?
I will second that.
Okay.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
Any opposed? I want to just take a moment here to thank Erin and the whole committee, but Erin impressed us hugely with her Excel skills. We had 47 people originally. We whittled it down to, I think, 17 that we had interviews with. And then we did a sorting process where Erin just flew through Excel. It was a great learning opportunity. So I'm going to try and learn some of the shortcuts.
Happy to give advice anytime if anyone wants to hone their Excel skills.
Yeah, it was impressive. All right. So now that that's done, Patty's going to take the next part of the conversation forward.
Well, there's not very much more to be said, except I noticed both Casey and Randy had their hands up.
Oh, I'm sorry, I missed that.
My hand wasn't up. It was an applause for the great group that we've got that come in. And I greatly appreciate everything that Erin and her group did to do this. I am again underqualified.
Same here. I was just, yay.
So I'm not sure there's a great deal more to be said. I think Erin's covered it very well. It was a difficult task for the best possible reason, and that was that we had a lot of very highly qualified people. And it's marvelous that that caliber of person wants to be part of the board. I think that makes us stronger. So I think we're very happy with the outcome of the selection process.
And then Patty, you're going to take us through the officer nominations?
I will indeed, yes. So the officer nominations, what is proposed is that Bonnie will take over from Paul next year as the chair, and Casey will be the vice chair. What am I missing, Paul? I know I'm missing something else.
Oh, then we'll vote today, and yes.
That's it. Thank you.
No, great. So we just need someone to make a motion. If there's any questions, this is the time to take those questions.
Well, I will move that we elect Bonnie as chair for the coming year and Casey as vice chair.
And I'll just lean in to say it's for 2 years is the appointment for the officer positions. Okay, and is there a second?
I'll second.
Great, David, thank you. Are there any questions? All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. We have two new officers starting in July.
You know what, Paul, I totally forgot to say something I made a note of.
Okay, go ahead.
My section. So, but it's important. So some of you might remember last year for oncoming board members, we had kind of a board buddy program that we did. And I really want to do this again for our new board members. And we need 6 people to volunteer to be board buddies, and I'll be one. So I would love if I could get 5 of you on this call today to volunteer to be a board buddy. So that's kind of like, reaching out to the person and, setting up a time to Zoom meet with them or whatever makes sense. And then just kind of being a resource for them. These people, I don't know that some of these people might know other people on the board already, but generally not. So having someone that you kind of get to know right off the bat, I think is a really great program that we started last year. So yes, I'm looking for volunteers for board buddies. So go ahead and raise your hand. Okay, Casey, who else?
Alejandro.
Great. Thank you.
Mike.
Okay. 2 more. Paul. Pressure's mounting. One more board bunny. Board buddy. Come on, you guys. Just need one more.
I'll do it.
Thank you, David.
Right.
Okay, great. Thanks. I'll be in touch about connecting you with a new board member and next steps. So, and a little more information about what the work is. So thank you all for volunteering.
Yeah, wonderful. Okay, and somehow magically we're back on our schedule. So it's time for our working group reports. And Erin, that means you're up first for community engagement.
Yeah, so I don't really have an update right now. But like you said, my hope is we can spend time at a retreat talking a little bit more about that proposal, the work of the group. I think getting that up and running will be a priority, and re-understanding, that's not a word, but figuring out who's going to be on that group, who was on it previously, if they want to keep on it, new members, hopefully new members can join us at the retreat, and we can have some of the new members join it too. But yeah, so that's my update.
Thank you. All right, next up is Mike reporting on financial sustainability.
Sure, thanks, Paul. So for the current year, things are continuing to track to budget. We're 3/4 of the way through the fiscal year, and expenses are about 70% of the year's budget. So that's good. And revenue is also tracking ahead of its budget projections that were revised. Remember, they were revised in the fall bump. So they're at about 82% of the year's budget. So both expenses and revenue are on the side that we want them to be on. The spring bump was passed by council. There's not a lot of unusual stuff this time, which is great. Last month, I did mention the $555,000 of general fund contingency funds that are allocated for higher than budgeted unemployment costs. And then one other change from the bump is that Parks was allocated an additional $175,000 for the remainder of this current fiscal year for enhanced parks maintenance. And on top of that, there's an additional $525,000 in the mayor's proposed budget for next year. And then without getting into technical details, there was also some reclassifying of some budget items that essentially preserves the Bureau's ability to spend some funds that were allocated for this year in future budget periods. So it gets them around that use it or lose it type of situation. There was one carryover for some funds that was not approved. That was about $300,000, a little over $300,000 for sustainable future expenses, which are still going to be funded. They're just not going to be funded from this year's general fund allocation. As far as the proposed budget for fiscal year 21-22, the mayor's proposed budget was released April 28th. And it reflects pretty much everything that came out of the CBO, in which we've talked about the last month or two. There were a couple notable exceptions. One was there's a capital set aside of $1.1 million for energy efficiency upgrades for the East Portland Community Center. That's kind of come and gone several times, so we'll see how that gets through once it gets to council. I did mention the additional $525,000 that's being that will be in the proposed budget for enhanced park maintenance next year. And then finally, the mayor's proposed budget includes $100,000 from the general fund to support the Parks Foundation. So hopefully that goes through. I'm sure Randy has some interest in that. The final adopted budget should be voted on by the council in June. Adina did talk on all the SDC allocations, so I don't think I need to go into that. At our last working group meeting, Claudio gave us a really good update on a funding restructure project the Bureau has begun, largely as a result of the levy, but more generally as from an overall increase in the number of the Bureau's funding sources. It's fairly technical undertaking, which includes looking at a lot of the accounting and budgeting related systems and processes to analyze things such as how is time billed, what type of revenues are used to fund what types of expenses, how costs are allocated, how rates are set, a lot of cost accounting kind of stuff. So Aaron, I'm sorry you missed out on that. You would have been in heaven. This restructure should significantly help the Bureau with implementing policies and processes to allow for more transparency, more consistency in rate setting, and also greater accuracy in allocating direct and indirect costs for services. So Claudio did give us an overview of the project steps for this, and we'll be reporting back as we have more information. And then finally, also at our last meeting, Sarah Huggins gave us an overview of the internal services ramp-up efforts related to the levy. There's a lot of pieces to this that are strategic and operational in nature and are probably beyond the scope of a financial sustainability report back. But as it's related to levy and sustainable future, it was really good information for our working group to have. So that's what I have. Are there any questions? Thanks.
Thanks, Mike. All right. And then Patty, you're up to present the Land Use and Infrastructure Group's report.
Thank you, Paul. Well, there are 4 projects to report on briefly. The first one is South Park blocks, and you heard from us on that one last time. The Parks and PBOT are working together to try and resolve a number of misunderstandings. As often happens in these cases, there are overlapping boundaries. Different documents don't agree as precisely where the boundary is. So they're trying to sort out that, and that's been the source of many of the misunderstandings over this whole project. The application for to put the South Park blocks on the historic register by the Downtown Neighborhood Association is awaiting comments from SHPO, and then they'll have everything, and it'll be completed and determination made. So we're in a waiting mode for that. The proposed new entrance to Forest Park off the St. Helens Road. You'll recall we were all surprised to learn through the press about the DEQ's fine of $458,000. And there's been a certain amount of forensic work into how did we get to that situation. And the staff are pretty confident that by the end of the year, they will have fulfilled the requirements of DEQ, and that fine therefore will be reduced to about 20,000. I think a concern in the working group is that maybe some of these missteps occurred because there was such a long time between property acquisition and doing anything about it. And I think one idea that was floated was that when something goes on for so long, maybe there should be a point at which we say, okay, are our objectives still the same? Have our priorities changed? Are we doing the right thing? I think there's been a lot of criticism of what that entrance to Forest Park can be and what it fails to be. And so I think that the lesson for the future is when something drags on that long, we really need to step back and take a look at what we're doing and why we're doing it, and how much it costs, and is it still the right thing to be done. The third project is the Grant Park lighting. That's actually a Portland Public Schools lead rather than Parks. I think there was, we know there was a lot of neighborhood unrest, and in part, I think that was due to the change in scope that occurred after a major public outreach effort. And so people thought they were getting one thing and they found they were getting another, and they got bent out of shape over that. The conclusion, however, is that there are very strict limits on when the lights are used and when sound announcing is used. So the peace and quiet of nearby residents should be fully respected while we're able to make the most of the playing field. And then the fourth project to report on very briefly is the I-5 covers. There's actually nothing new to report on that now, but there will be next month. So we hope to be able to report back to you next month. And that, I think, is all that we have covered this month. Thank you.
Thank you, Patty. Any questions for Patty? Okay. And then Bonnie, I don't think there's much to report for process improvement.
No, there isn't, Paul. Yeah, we're keeping that on there as a standing item because we're in anticipation that the two bureaus are going to continue some efforts on the process improvement. So it's kind of a placeholder for us, but thank you. Okay.
And then Casey is going to speak to us or share with us about the affirmation of equity statement.
Just briefly, alternative revised affirmation of equity statements. We have one that is modeled after the existing one, and then one that's brand new. They were provided over to Kenya because we wanted to get his comments and also to make sure that the statement we issue is in harmony with the one that the Parks has. Of course, Parks is now going through their process of developing a new equity statement, and they're doing a lot of work, which we get to take advantage of. They have finished their, I believe today is actually the last comment day, and they're going to start drafting a statement, which will then go out for more comments. And we will wait for their draft when they let us see it, and kind of see how that lines up with our drafts. And once we get to see a comparison, we'll probably take a revised statement or statements to the Community Development Working Group to start working through them to get something to present to the board.
Thank you, Casey. Are there any questions for Casey? All right, we're a quiet group this morning. All right, that brings us to Randy and the Portland Park Foundation report.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to put a registration in the chat for our Spring Friends and Allies Summit on May 27th. Would love it if all of you could join us at that. It's going to be sort of, we do, well, we're in the process of doing, COVID sort of disrupted us a little bit, 2 Friends and Allies summits per year. And this is really bringing together the various friends groups of parks and other nonprofit organizations devoted to parks. Some are large, like Hoyt Arboretum, and some are tiny, little groups devoted to, nature education programs and whatnot. And we did a fall summit that was really about technical assistance and really delving into work. Our vision for the spring summit has always been celebratory. So let's celebrate the great volunteer work. Let's have some inspiration, and it'll be a short program on Zoom. And it will feature our annual Parks Heroes Awards, which is devoted to great volunteerism, and each of the heroes gets $1,500 to contribute to any of organization they would like. We will be honoring our founding chair, Joey Pope, who also oversaw the Citizens Advisory Committee for the Parks 2020 plan. And those of you who don't know Joey, she's been a stalwart and generous, both in treasure and time, contributor to our park system for a very long time. And so we'll be honoring her, and in part because it's our 20th anniversary. And then we will also be announcing a new Emerging Parks Leadership Fund, which I'll talk more about at the summit. And then Commissioner Rubio is going to join us as a sort of final act for the what we think will be about an hour and 15-minute long evening. So hope you can join us. Meantime, we continue to work on a festival to help reactivate downtown, and we think we've arrived at something that is achievable and exciting and actually kind of novel. We've been working with a group of 16 BIPOC leaders that we've called our think tank group. And it's been interesting. They come from all walks of life, ranging from the numbers to Don't Shoot Portland, PSU, Daryl Grant's on it. It's a great range of people in age and interests and parts of the city. And it's been a really interesting, deep dive into what their attitudes are toward downtown, what they perceive their communities' attitudes are toward downtown. And it's been a very robust and educational discussion. And a smaller group of them are going to move forward as our steering committee for the festival. And where we've kind of landed is they really want us to build the festival around mutual aid, and to really elevate groups that are working to uplift the community, not through means of charity, but through means of collaboration. The previous vision I shared with you was quite large and sprawling. It was going to encompass the entire North and South Park blocks. We've had to scale back. And then we also have arrived at our preferred dates, which will be Friday and Saturday and maybe Sunday, August 27th through 29th. And the idea is that it will be a series of sort of evening walks to bring our oldest parks alive, and it'll be artisan markets, and it'll be flexible as needed for social distancing, and it's to celebrate our 20th anniversary. But we want it to be an act of civic reimagination. And so we're going to build it around mutual aid groups, both in trying to elevate their work, celebrate them, both in terms of opportunities to raise money, opportunities to just make people more aware of their work. We plan to intermingle that with the artisan markets and call outs from any performers, maybe pairing up with performers. So we're still working on that. We have our next meeting on Wednesday. We'll really start fleshing this out. Our original plan was the whole, like I say, whole park blocks, and we've arrived at really centering it on from Director Park to Market Street. We're going to be actively collaborating with the Portland Art Museum, which is working with PBOT to close down Madison Avenue. And this will be sort of the heart of the festival. And the museum will be programming all summer, but we're talking about the Paseo being a kind of culmination event. And so we're really excited. I personally have a long relationship working with the museum, and they're just great collaborators and really innovative thinkers, and it should be quite interesting. There's all kinds of things to do. It's such an interesting little section of town if you really look at it, sort of square foot by square foot. There's the monuments that we've obviously heard about in the news, but there's all kinds of little monuments along this stretch that honor all kinds of different things, from the wood plank road that sort of put the port in Portland to trees that were planted, from the Muslim community, to a tree that was planted by the Muslim community to honor those who were killed at the Oklahoma City bombing, and just little things like that. So it's quite a rich area. We're hoping we'll be able to engage some artists to sort of engage in that. And then the sort of long play plan, still could happen, but it's really contingent on other partners. And we decided we had really no control as to whether many of these things would happen. And so we just decided to concentrate on what we could control. But there's still, PSU is working on a creative placemaking project that would take place up here. The Ankeny West Food Cart Pod is in the mayor's budget, and there's, I think, active work on trying to make that happen by August, and that would be awesome. So we could probably connect that up. And then Prosper is working with Vanport Mosaic to activate the North Park blocks, and we'll see how that goes. If they're successful, then we can also join hands and have a much larger version of this walk through the city. With that, that's my report.
Thank you, Randy. Are there any questions for Randy? All right. So looking ahead to next month, and we won't have a regular board meeting, but we'll have our retreat. And so the notion is that we'd like to ideally see if we could have a social component to that, which we weren't able to have last year. And we don't have a park location yet, but we'd probably make it somewhere relatively central on the east side, and socially distanced. We'd be wearing masks as would be appropriate still. I'm not sure about that, because at this point, if we have people who are fully vaccinated, I believe that we could meet safely without masks. So we would poll to make sure that people would be comfortable with however we did that. So that would it'd be fun to have an opportunity just to visit socially, which we didn't do last year. And then we'd split it up over 2 afternoons, a Friday afternoon and a Saturday afternoon. Tentatively, we've proposed the 11th and 12th of June. And I just wanted to get a sense today of people on the call who, if anyone has a conflict that they know of or an issue with either of those dates.
Oh, I'm out of town on the 12th. I can do the 11th, but I would miss the Saturday one.
Okay, that is good to know. Anyone else? Okay, well, are there other dates that would be better for you, Mike, that we might want to talk about briefly this morning rather?
Oh boy, it's all, let me pull it up.
Okay.
If you're talking about Friday, Saturdays?
I mean, that was the notion, to break it up, because 2 hours on a Zoom call is probably about the limit for most of us. So
yeah. 18th and 19th are fine. 25th and 26th are fine, but don't schedule just around me, but either of those would work.
Okay. We'll check in terms of schedule. I mean, we'd like to get Cynthia Castro there, so we haven't confirmed her schedule yet, and ideally at least a sort of drive-by, a wave-in by Commissioner Rubio. So we have to check with her calendar and see her availability. So um, that information helps a lot. So thank you. So, this is our goal setting opportunity. Each year is our retreat, and we've got some, I guess, remedial work to do based on what we were talking about earlier in terms of the work that had come out of the community engagement group and not letting that die on the vine, so to speak, and to pick that up and carry some of that forward. And then also, aligning with programs that park leadership has identified in terms of strategic planning that's underway. We're also trying to schedule a meeting here in the next couple of weeks aligned with that as well. So we'll be drafting an agenda and sharing that. And I'm really glad to hear that for the most part, the 11th and 12th could work for people. So that's great. I just want to get a sense of how enthusiastic people would be for a social event on that Thursday on the 10th preceding our retreat. So we could do, are people familiar with fist to 5? That's kind of a quick sort of pulse taking thing. So 5 being all in, very excited, fist being, nah, it doesn't work for me at all. 3 kind of being in the middle. So in terms of our social events, I'm going to say that I'd really like to do it. So obviously we'll see what the responses are. So got 4s, 5s, 4 there. Great. So Alejandro, is that a fist? Okay, not sure. Okay, we'll take that for what it is. So thank you. That is helpful in terms of getting a sense of the level of enthusiasm for getting together, and we'll find a location that just feels good, I think. So are there any other questions or topics that people want to make sure is incorporated into our agenda for our retreat? We've identified one already in terms of picking up the work that was put down by the Community Engagement Working Group.
Has the work session for the Healthy Parks, Healthy Portland been scheduled? Because I'm also thinking we may want to pick up some of that discussion as part of the retreat agenda if we can. I know Brooke sent out a doodle poll last week, I think.
Deadline is today for responding to that. So we should know very shortly when that's going to be held.
Okay. Good. All right. Well, that gives us enough to get started then on the actual agenda for our retreat. And then I think at this point, Adina, it's yours on Healthy Parks, Healthy Portland.
Yeah, I'm gonna, Nicola, do we have everyone here? I see Stephanie.
Stephanie's in. I think Catherine's on her way.
Shall we tap dance for 5 minutes?
I'll go ahead and get started. Yeah, Catherine will be here probably at 10:30. I'll give her a chat.
Okay, great. Nicola, are you driving? Wonderful, thank you. So hello, everyone. I'm excited to be here today to give the Healthy Parks, Healthy Portland project update. Our internal project team has been hard at work over the last few weeks with our partners from Future Work Design. We want to introduce you to them today and tell you how our work is shaping up. We only have a few minutes today, but as you know, we're working on scheduling a longer work session with all of you during the last week of May. As mentioned just a moment ago, Brooke sent out the doodle poll last week. So again, it ends today. So if you haven't responded, please do so by the end of today. We'll set the work session date tomorrow based on which date and time has the best attendance. Next slide. By now, you are familiar with the Healthy Parks, Healthy Portland framework. The goal of Healthy Parks, Healthy Portland can only be achieved if our services, programs, parks, and facilities are provided equitably to all Portlanders. We will center Black, Indigenous, people of color, refugees and immigrants, people experiencing poverty, people living with disabilities, youth, and older adults in this important work. We see the Healthy Parks, Healthy Portland framework as a cyclical, overlapping process of continuous improvement that goes on forever. That said, we will always be bound by decision points and milestones imposed by city processes such as the budget process and annual performance reporting, which means we will be making decisions while we improve our processes. Over time, this framework will transform the way we work by centering our values and engaging community in deciding about the services we provide. As an organization, we have a lot of work to accomplish in 2021 to align community co-creation, resource allocation decisions, and budget deadlines. We've made progress bringing this new way of working to life, and we're excited to share that update with you. Next slide. So I'm happy to introduce our partners, Future Work Design. We have Stephanie Joya and Catherine Jarrell will be joining us shortly, who are co-leads on our project. Stephanie and Catherine, thank you so much for being here today. I'm going to stop sharing for a moment so that you can both come off mute and say hello to the board.
Hi, good morning. I'm Stephanie Joya. I'm a founding partner at Future Work Design, and my specialty is strategic planning and organizational design innovation. And we're so pleased to be working on this engagement with you. We've had a nice quick start over the last month, and it's been wonderful to dig in. And Catherine's here as well.
Hi, I'm Catherine Jarrell. I'm also a founding partner at Future Work Design, specializing in strategic planning with a specific lens through both customer and employee experience. Excited to be here.
Great. I'm just going to pass it right on to Stephanie. Keep it rolling.
All right, perfect. Nicola, if you want to continue to share those slides, I think we can discuss some of those living documents that we're looking to build together. All right, so what will it look like to define our Healthy Parks, Healthy Portland vision? As the future of what this looks like comes into focus, we are planning to capture it in a series of living documents. So I'll walk you through those. So first, we are building our listening and learning process that shows the planned touch points with stakeholders for the rest of this year, and then looking beyond to establish a sustainable cadence, a real rhythm of stakeholder collaboration. The second thing is we are building a decision-making tool that will provide a common framework to evaluate choices and investment decisions through a really integrated lens, including many of the lenses we already use, but really trying to integrate those. So strategy, equity, values, feasibility, other dimensions, and we are co-designing that with staff, community, you will be involved as well. So by co-designing our decision-making values with community and making it transparent, this is one of the key ways that we see that we can be more accountable to stakeholders. The third piece is we are seeking input to update our mission, vision, values, and equity statement. And we are really excited to have renewed, clear statements to guide the future of Portland Parks and Rec that reflect how the Bureau is evolving, and also were genuinely co-created with the communities that we serve. And we will involve you in that as well. We will involve you in all of this. So fourth is later in the summer, we will be documenting our strategy in terms of actions and results. And we're moving away from more kind of rigid 3 or 5 year plans to a more flexible, dynamic form of planning. And that actions and results piece is going to be a key part of that. So I just wanted to acknowledge overall that this does represent a shift toward more agile planning approach. And I really applaud the Bureau for moving in this direction. I work with a lot of organizations who are considering more agile forms of planning. And I feel like Portland Parks and Rec has many of the hallmarks of organizations that are a good fit for this type of planning. So I thought I could share my perspective on that a little bit. First, you guys are aiming to be more responsive to community and the community that you are responding to is dynamic and growing and changing. And that is a big hallmark for what makes Agile planning a good fit. You aspire to be an anti-racist organization, and traditional planning carries with it many pitfalls of its legacy and sort of mechanistic, industrial, kind of colonial practice. And there are some really wonderful alternatives that are baked into more agile planning that I think are a great fit for that, and really help us engage better with different communities who think about planning in a different way. And third, relative to kind of short-term minded corporations for whom many planning practices have, that we've adapted many of our planning practices from, as a public community benefit organization, you guys really take the long view. And so organizations that wish to be primarily accountable to outcomes rather than short-term outputs really benefit from agile planning, because it really helps keep the focus on the goal. So those 4 things that you saw on that slide are the beginning of the scaffolding to bring that agile planning to life. And they probably will look different when we talk about this again in a year. And that's kind of the point. They're going to continue to evolve as we prototype and test them to make sure that they're really helping us reach our goals of being that responsive organization. So I'll also share with you on the next slide, specifically, we are really working on this listening and learning process right now. And we're working out kind of the practical rhythms of what that process will be, both from what works from our perspective, and the sort of city budgeting cadence and all of that, but also matching that with the community cadence and trying to kind of knit that interaction together. And we are looking forward to sharing a draft with you at our upcoming longer workshop. But for today, we just wanted to share a few things that we know about how we want it to work. And those are captured in these principles that we've used to design that process. So empowering community, really recognizing that we are the steward of the people's parks and recreation system. And so that those solutions that we are creating and those decisions are going to be made through a collaborative decision-making process. Really centering the voices of the folks that we have identified as, most needing representation in our work: Black and Indigenous people, people of color, immigrants, refugees, youth, older adults, people living with disabilities, and people living with low income. Anti-racism. So we are the racial equity lens that we are now, PPNR is using across the organization and beginning to adopt, is also something that we are putting this process through. And we'll also use that as a regular accountability check for ourselves. And then really just having a deliberate process. Community listening and community engagement is really complex. There's a lot to balance. There's a lot to orchestrate to do that well. And we know we need a really deliberate process, a cycle of continuous improvement that really balances the weight of voices intentionally, even if that slows us down sometimes. So we are not going to be, iterating the strategy responsively after every touch point, because we recognize that listening to just the loudest voices or the most recent voices isn't going to drive equitable decisions, but we're really looking at trying to balance and be very deliberate across that process. And then building trust. So we know we have a legacy to repair, and we're really committed to building trust through this process, through two-way communication, through building shared goals with community, and really building a history of promises kept. So those were some of the things that we kind of design principles, I guess, just into how this engagement process is going to work. And again, looking forward to sharing that and getting your feedback on that when we have more time together in the near future. So I'll look forward to seeing you again then, and I will turn it back over to Director Long.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. We've been hard at work planning the community listening that will inform the early phases of the project. We had an SMT retreat on May 4th, and we'll have our 4th employee gathering this week. You might remember that we've been meeting with staff since December to lay the groundwork for Healthy Parks, Healthy Portland. Next week, we will be holding a work session with the Diversity and Equity Committee, Fostering Equity Support Team, and our Equity and Inclusion team. The last week of May, we will be having our work session with you. Exact date TBD. Our community engagement team is working with Future Work Design to create a strong community listening and learning plan with external stakeholders. We will continue to update you on this work as it progresses. And we will be recruiting for our listening team and work teams, which I'll describe in a little bit. Next slide. The Parks Board is a major stakeholder for co-creation of this planning work. We look forward to sharing our thoughts about our process with you at our May work session when we have more time together. There will be additional opportunities for us to work with you as a whole and possibly with your subcommittees or work groups. We will also bring regular updates to your regular monthly meetings. And there's an opportunity to have Parks Board representation on our Portland Parks and Recreation project work teams. Let's talk about the work teams now. Healthy Parks, Healthy Portland will use a process of community listening, followed by synthesis of stories and data. This information will then be incorporated into project drafts and deliverables. We will be recruiting work teams to assist with this focused work. The listening team will be made up of 5 to 6 internal specialists who will help collect and synthesize stories and data from the community. The listening team will attend and facilitate listening workshops. The commitment level for this work is high and will last throughout 2021 and quite possibly beyond. Then we will recruit experts from various functions in the Bureau and from the Parks Board and our other advisory committees to serve on 4 different work teams and help draft deliverables. The 4 teams are Listening and Learning Plan. This team will receive input on our process for 2021 and going forward, and will help incorporate the community listening into final plans. The commitment level for this team is medium, with most of the work taking place August through October of this year. The decision-making tool team. We are forming this team now as a prototype tool that will be piloted as part of our budget decision-making for our fall budget monitoring process. The commitment level for this team is high, with weekly meetings expected throughout 2021. Mission, vision, values, and equity statement team. The commitment level for this team is medium, with most of the work taking place August through October. Actions and results. This team will help draft strategic actions and performance measures, but the scope and commitment of the team are still being formulated. We're hoping that one Parks Board member will serve on each working team. We will work with Paul and Bonnie on the best approach for recruitment and will continue to share information about the teams as they are developed. I'm going to turn it back over to Stephanie to give you a quick overview of our May Parks Board work session.
All right, so when we are back together, we would like all of your input into those 3 of those 4 big pieces that I shared. So that decision-making tool, the listening and learning process, mission, vision, values, and equity statement. And if you are the sort of person that likes to prepare for these things, we're going to give you the cheat sheet here of the 4 big questions that we're going to want to be workshopping with you. So we're going to want to look at how our current stated mission, vision, and values need to change. How might we ensure the perspectives of the communities we serve are driving decisions about parks and recreation, and really get your input on how, like I mentioned, all of this needs to knit together, looking at some options for that and how you see that working. And then what is the unique role that Portland Parks and Recreation plays in our community, really trying to understand that value and that benefit that we provide. And then what values should we use when making decisions? And that, again, is going to feed into that's input coming into the decision-making tool. These are questions we are going to be asking you and working on with you, and also many other stakeholders to this work. So we're excited to hear your perspective and really incorporate that voice into the work.
Great. Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, Catherine, for joining us. I know that's a lot of information, but it'll be even more information in our next work session. But I just wanted to pause because we have a little time to see if anyone has any questions or if anyone needs any clarifications about the process thus far.
This is really just a comment, but I really like the term agile planning. And I don't know if you want to explain a little bit more about the origins of that and how it's being used, but personally, I find it interesting.
Well, there are a lot of kind of connotations to that term. It's not directly linked to the idea of agile development, but I think that's a lot of the association it gets, which is a way of developing products and technology in a much more iterative, continuous feedback loop. And that's really been adapted into a lot of organizational planning for larger things, for strategy. And it has, I would say it's, in some ways it's a new way of working, and in some ways it's a very, very old way of working. And so bringing that practice to life in organizations can sometimes feel a little countercultural, but often has just incredible benefits for organizations. So really excited to be sharing that and bringing that to life with you guys.
Thanks for that background. Other comments or questions? Bonnie.
Thank you so much for the overview, Adina, Stephanie, and Catherine. Really appreciate it and really excited to be going through this process. I guess one thing that I'm just a little bit, I'm grateful that you want to include the board to the degree that you described. I'm a little bit concerned about our ability to get a volunteer among the board to commit to a team that's going to meet once a week. That's a lot. And I don't know, I think that's going to be a heavy lift to not only get, 4 different board members to commit to each of these teams. At least that's what I thought I heard you say, Stephanie, was it's 4 teams, and you're looking for a board member for each of those teams, one of which could have touch points every week. So I just want to ask you, and I don't need an answer right now, but maybe think about ways that you can curate those opportunities so that they might, depending on our ability to get somebody to commit to the different levels that you're hoping for. It's a pretty heavy lift for a volunteer. So I just want to kind of point that out there and have us thinking about ways that we can meaningfully incorporate this board's involvement at potentially different levels.
Thank you, Bonnie. You articulated the question that was in the back of my mind.
Yeah, thank you, Bonnie. I think flexibility is the name of the game on this, and we want to be really open to as much involvement as possible. But yeah, I think that's great feedback, and I think we can look at what our options are for making, having your voice and influence in that work, but maybe with more flexibility on how often you're directly involved. So we can give you put some thought to that.
Yeah, and I just bring it up because, we had Brooke asking for the last 3 meetings for an advisory board member for the Mill Park Advisory Committee. And finally, Erin volunteered, which we are so grateful to Erin for always stepping up for these things. But, Erin is not in that community. She really did it because I think she felt, well, I don't want to put words about why Erin's doing it. But my point is, here's an effort which I recognize the scope and the importance of this effort to the Bureau and to the board. And like I said, I really appreciate wanting to include the voice very much. So please don't take that the feedback as anything but appreciation for that. I'm just trying to think about, again, 4 members at these varying levels. So I'll stop repeating myself now. Thanks.
If I could just jump in, Bonnie, I appreciate that. Each team will have a nice sort of group of folks from different areas included. And having said that, perhaps you might want to think you and Paul maybe think about which areas you think the board would have the most interest in contributing. And the project team can think about other ways to make sure that we're continuing to keep the board involved and giving them opportunities to provide input, but perhaps at a less of a lower commitment rate. So I think between the two of us thinking about that, we can come up with a nice balance.
Thanks, Adina. Other comments or questions? It was a really good presentation, so thank you for that. And we look forward to engaging with you going forward. If there's no other questions, we'll thank you for coming and presenting today.
Thank you so much.
All right, that brings us to closure a little bit early today. Is there anything else before we break? All right, well, the goddess of unexpected time has visited us with 13 minutes, so enjoy the rest of your day.